Hello and welcome to Linking Out Loud, the digital PR podcast. I'm Rachel McHugh and I'm very excited to be joined by Thea Chippendale today. We're going to be talking about digital PR strategies and choosing the right strategy for your client. So hello and welcome, Thea.
Hey.
Thank you very much for joining me. We were just discussing how you were the very first person who agreed to be on this podcast, which was a couple of months ago now when it wasn't really a thing. So thanks for taking a bit of a leap of faith and not thinking it was a scam. I had no evidence to show this was a real thing. So much more legit now. Thank you very much for joining me. So we're going to be talking about different strategies and tactics that you can use. How did you choose the most suitable one? But before we get into that, could you give us a bit of an intro to yourself and what you're working on?
So I'm Thea. I worked in digital PR now for, I think it's like 6 or 7 years. I'm going to have to fact check myself on LinkedIn afterwards. I started at a very small flooring company in Leeds. And from there, Kerry Rose messaged me and I ended up getting a job at Rise of 7 just when it first started kind of launching. And I stayed there for about 2 years. And then I moved to an agency in London and was the head of PR there. And then I've made the leap to freelance and now I'm TLC freelance.
You've had quite the journey from agency to freelance and not very long periods of time. So that's a really impressive career trajectory. Some people listening may also know you from your newsletter.
Sorry.
The PR Insider.
How could I forget?
How could you forget?
Yeah, so I launched a newsletter about a year ago now that basically includes everything that I think PR should know on a weekly basis. Basically collating all of the campaigns that Grace and I found, who is also part of the PR Insider, Grace Burton. Shout out to Grace. And yeah, basically we put all the campaigns that we found together. We interview different PR experts on there and loads of other things. Basically that, yeah, like I said, any PR should know on a weekly basis. And we also have a website where we interview PRs on a more, in-depth basis.
And more than just a shameless plug, it is actually a really valuable resource. We're really big fans of the newsletter here at Distinctly. So if you're not already subscribed, check them out. I'll put a link to your website or where you can subscribe in the description so people can find you. Now, as part of that, you must go through hundreds of thousands of campaigns and articles and that sort of thing every week. Without giving away all of your secrets, where do you look for inspiration, whether that's for campaigns or new tactics?
So I'm more than happy to give away any kind of tactics. It's not like it's a secret or anything like that. And I really, really wish I had some kind of secret tactic that we use, but honestly, it's just a lot of manual labor that we do. We have certain sites and things like that we tend to go to. So my favorites are typically US publications because they seem to cover a lot of stuff. So Design Taxi is my favorite. That is my go-to for all the big creative product kind of campaigns. All of the food publications in the US always cover such interesting stories. So Delish,
yes,
Eat This, Not That, Food and Wine. The ones even Apartment Therapy, House Beautiful as well. They all cover quite interesting campaigns that I don't tend to see in the UK press. Famous campaigns, obviously, it's just the gold mine for creative. Little Black Book.
Oh, yes.
That is such a good, because that is agencies directly putting their work.
Yeah.
So you can get every single thing that you need to know about the campaign on it's like a briefing sheet, basically. So they're my go-tos. The other thing that is my top tip is, it's search indicators, basically, on Google. You know how when you're searching for an exact phrase, you put it in the quotation marks and it'll come up with it?
Yeah, I do a lot of that if we're looking for new campaigns, new study, and then see anyone who's written about new study. Sometimes you get scientific studies from that though, so it's not quite the right thing, but that sort of PR-led article. And so with all these campaigns that you've seen, are there any in recent months that you've really loved or that you thought were a bit different?
I've got a lot that I've loved. I really and I feel like it's kind of obvious with the fact that I've just said I love looking at Delish and Eat This, Not That and stuff like that. I really like the food campaigns. So the sauces Heinz, Hellmann's, they all do such insane campaigns, but that work so well. They've just done one they've collaborated with a lover of ketchup and made the whole groomsman suit out
I think I saw that.
the Heinz ketchup things. It's just so weird.
Yeah.
They're now forever ingrained in my head as such an innovative, because nobody's doing weird things like that.
Yeah, they're taking risks.
And like every time I do anything about Heinz in the newsletter, there's always people messaging me like, oh my God, I love that Heinz campaign and stuff like that. And my other one that I really like is I love when brands pit each other against each other kind of thing. So for example, this week, Wendy's there's a site in the US called McBroken. I think it might be in the UK, but it basically tracks all of the McFlurry machines that are broken down. And basically Wendy's is obviously another US big chain. And what they've done is they're tracking where they get broken, and then they go with this big van, and it's like, if you actually want something, come to Wendy's or something like that. It's like very confident to be able to do that. The other example I've got is Pizza Hut recently did one where they were the official sponsors of Domino's.
I saw that. I think that's genius.
Yeah, so good. But a lot of like clients and like brands are just too scared to pit each other against each other. And I think those are the ones that people talk about the most. Like those are the ones that have stayed in my like head more than just like the normal, like boring-ish kind of campaigns.
X cities for whatever. Yeah, you're right. These ones that take a bit more of a risk, or they're a bit more creative and wacky. That was cool. I like those. And those kind of fall under the stunt PR
100%,
umbrella. So beyond that, what would you consider to be the main areas or routes that you can go down with digital PR?
So the main ones for me, the main ones that I've ever used are things like stunts, the creative kind of side, thought leadership, reactive. I do think thought leadership is different in everybody's eyes.
Yeah.
I don't know how you might see thought leadership, but for me, thought leadership is, I mean, obviously it's putting the brand as the expert on a specific topic. But for me at the moment, people are using thought leadership for things like getting on the Express for like the best mold tips and things like that. Like that's very much what I'm seeing from the thought leadership perspective, rather than the typical B2B, like the CEO being interviewed as part of the business kind of thing. Data led, obviously. Cannot forget the data led. So I definitely think those are the main ones in my eyes. Again, I feel like digital PR is different for so many agencies. So different and so similar at the same time. But yeah.
Nice. I think that summarizes the main umbrellas.
Yeah.
But even within that, there's so many things that you can do. Like stunt/creative is so broad.
When I was thinking about it, I was thinking how interesting it is to see the different trends that happen in digital PR in terms of when I first started, the big thing that we were doing was all stunts and the big creative campaigns and things like that. But now when I look at things like stunts, like for example, when I used to work at another agency, we had quite a big kind of brand and we did a stunt. This was only like maybe 2 years ago. We did a stunt with some jewelry for Valentine's Day, and it was like an anti-Valentine's thing, and it had like break up with him, dump him kind of thing. And it got no coverage. And I was like, 4 years ago, that would have been everywhere. But I feel like it's got so saturated with the like, you can now be a hot tub tester, you can now be a thing, that I feel like journalists aren't covering those kinds of things as much anymore in my opinion.
Maybe. I think it goes in cycles, right? Before I started doing digital PR, there was a big wave of infographics and that was the thing. Whereas now we've kind of been there, done that. So journalists get a bit over it.
Yeah.
I've also seen on socials, which not necessarily a digital PR thing, but loads of brands doing AI generated images over Big Ben. It'll be like a towel flying in over Big Ben. I don't know if you've seen that.
It was really cool at the start when it was like, oh my God.
Is it real?
Like, I was like, oh my God, what the hell is happening? But yeah, it was when it's had that shock factor. But now when you see it every single kind of day from a different brand doing a different thing, it's not as interesting. It's like when people used to float things down the Thames.
Oh yeah.
And now they're doing AI generated. And I was like, that's not the same effect, having something that you're literally like film
on the actual Thames. Yeah. Or actually flying in over Big Ben. It's not quite the same impact.
But I definitely think it's just such a cycle with digital PR. At the moment, I really do think, I don't know if it's because a lot of my freelance clients I do a lot of thought leadership and reactive with, but I definitely see a bit of more of a resurgence in doing those kind of tactics over like the big creative ones. Like I see the big creatives from big brands who have got the budget to make it incredible, but not from maybe smaller brands. I feel like they're more focusing on the ones that, I mean, people say this all the time about the risk factor of doing those creative campaigns. You put in so much money for a small brand to do these big risque campaigns to not necessarily getting the results that they need. So yeah, I do think people go through these cycles of focusing on this thought leadership, reactive, proactive kind of strategy.
A bit more like human centric, like this is an actual expert in this topic. You can trust us, especially in the whole digital SEO world. That trust and expertise is a big thing. So we've kind of touched on the idea that trends can be something that really impacts what strategy you might choose. If something's really working for lots of people, you might be inclined to choose the stunt type PR. But if we're seeing that maybe it's a bit overdone, that might lead you to choose something different. What else, or how else do you decide what is a suitable strategy for your client? What are some of the things at play?
I think there's a lot of things that end up being at play for these kinds of things. It's a lot, I feel like with smaller clients, they have less people to sign things off. So like they might be more inclined to maybe doing those kind of bigger ones, or maybe doing something that's like a bit more risque that goes away from their brand. Like I know a lot of people have a lot of marketing teams that are very brand focused. Even if it's just data led things, like it has to be very dead on what they want to be seen as a brand.
There's also no right or wrong. And that's kind of the point almost. You can see on paper a certain client and think, I know exactly what I'd love to do for this client. And the cogs are whirring and you've got 10 different ideas for campaigns. You're like, really want to do campaigns with them. But there's 5 things out of your control that mean that you can't actually do that.
Yeah.
What are some of those things that kind of help? What's a bit of a checklist maybe that you'd think in terms of choosing the right strategy?
All of my freelance clients are smaller clients where I pretty much just do thought leadership. And the reason I do that is because their budget is so much more constrained.
Yeah.
That I have to try to figure out what I can do with that time that's going to be the most effective. So like, for example, I worked on one where we had the budget to do a survey, and I did a survey and it didn't work. So I had to pivot it and use it. The data that I had is basically like a reactive, but using the data, if that makes sense. So it was, it's a hard one.
It is a hard one. And sometimes it is those external factors that end up making you choose one strategy or another. Budget being a huge thing.
Yeah. The press, I mean, think about the amount of things that have gone in the press at the moment. I remember when the Queen died and we literally could not do anything for like 2-3 weeks. We switched up the strategies there just to either do some reactive that could come from like things that were happening around that time, or we just basically all focus on the strategy and working on the strategy and doing brainstorms and stuff like that. So
yeah, you're right. Sometimes a strategy might work, but just not right now, and you've got to be flexible. Do you think that's part of something you should consider at the early stages? Maybe not choosing something really fixed, but being quite transparent and open and saying we've got more of a flexible strategy so that if one thing doesn't work, we can try something different.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you guys work with your clients, but I always do overarching strategies. So it's like we've got the main one, which might be the data-led. So that's going to be going over like 1 month is going to be collecting the data, the next month is the outreach, and so on. And then also having in the background this constant like always on tactic for like media monitoring, journalist requests, reactive opportunities, and doing those like thought leadership takes like a couple of hours to put a press release together and find it's always the same journalists that talk about it. So it's quite easy just to like have this constant like thought leadership reactive kind of tactic going on. So yeah.
Yes, makes sense. And you kind of mentioned before there about how smaller businesses might have fewer people signing things off. So sometimes something that's totally out of your control or that the client might not even realize is a factor could affect what actually works for you. So for example, if it's a bigger business typically and there's loads of stages of sign off, doing reactive PR might not work because the opportunity will come up, you finally get sign off from everyone that you can go through with the idea. Then you write up a comment, send it to them, they sign it off, and then 2 weeks have passed and no one cares about the actual reactive opportunity that was happening.
Yeah, I mean, what I typically tend to do with clients that are like that, so like I've worked with loads of like tech clients and things like that it's a bit more of a serious subject, like I can't personally like write it up and everything like that. I do comment banks, so I typically do like an analysis of like BuzzSumo, what the journalist requests have been, and basically answer all of the questions based on my knowledge, my research, everything like that. I put this massive comment bank together, and basically the experts at their business will sign it off. And then that's an easier way to, if things come up, you can amend it slightly. Because obviously, like, I mean, just been talking about it, if you are pitching to them some like data-led campaigns or anything like that, and they're a bit wary, things like reactive and thought leadership, you can just keep going out with the comments, or if a journalist comes to you and asks for something, you've got something that's ready-made that you can just basically give to them. So there's always ways around it if the strategy's not quite kind of working.
It's nice to have that sort of content as well to fall back on. So even if you're just waiting for survey data to come back or waiting to hear back from the client, you know that without even needing to go back and forth, you have something that's already signed off that you can just send out to a journalist if something happens, or you can find the relevant thing to relate it to. So it's a nice medium to have.
Yeah.
If you have a new client come to you or a potential lead and you were going to pitch to them, what's your thought process in terms of how do I know what I'm going to pitch to them?
Obviously, it always depends on things like budget. If they've got a small budget, then it tends to stick within the kind of the proactive, reactive kind of thing. And then it obviously always depends on the industries that they're in. So, for example, like I was talking about tech clients aren't the ones that you're going to see on the Express talking about some cleaning tips. They're going to be the ones that are either wanting to get on the B2B publications, which obviously kind of is a bit annoying when you're a digital PR because not a lot of the B2B publications tend to link. So you have to kind of figure out beyond that how you would get them into the news that's not B2B, but that's not going on to national. So, I mean, as a one person who does it I don't have a team to brainstorm things around. But I typically start off with the smaller ones. And as soon as I feel like with the smaller reactive ones, you can see results pretty much instantly, which makes a client more confident with your abilities as a PR. I feel like a lot of the people that come to you and they've never done digital PR before, they're very wary of it, or they've had link building before and they're not 100% sure about why you would be doing that. Why can't you just go onto a blog and do whatever? So I feel like when people come to you like that, you've got to give them something tangent to see, we link here, it's DA so-and-so. Yeah. And then they get excited, which means that then they potentially will give more budget towards it. So you can go into those ones where you can get data-led, where you can get global links, creative, where you can make noise in the industry. So I feel like I personally always start off small and then I work my way up to gradually getting the confidence within not only the client, but also journalists. I feel like what typically tends to happen when you're doing these creative or data-led campaigns is if a journalist doesn't know you or a brand, then they might not typically trust that data or know that it's solid data, I feel like. Because I feel like maybe that was why my campaign didn't work when I did the survey. They've never done PR before, so they've never seen that person, that name in their inboxes before. So obviously that's going to be a bit of a, I'm not 100% sure kind of thing. Let's see what else they come up with. And then as soon as I basically did loads of thought leadership, reactive, built up some relationships with the journalists, and then they're more interested in hearing about the different data parts and things like that, and they come to you for things rather than you going to them. So I always think there's benefits in starting small and working your way up. I feel like in digital PR, everyone's all big creative kind of things, and I feel like they're so impressive. But at the same time, that's not going to suit every single client, and it's not going to suit the smaller ones who need to brand build, basically.
And I think that's probably the biggest takeaway. Every single brand is going to be different, and every strategy won't work for every client. It's not just about budget or industry. Trust is hugely important. The idea that you touched on there with journalists as well. If they've never heard of the brand and you've got a bit of a wacky story, or it doesn't sound like the methodology is that solid, they might just think, I don't really trust this, I'm going to ignore it. But if it was a big brand that everyone knows, immediately they're just going to be on board with what they're pitching in. And also with clients as well, building that trust and saying, you've given me your money, here's what I can actually do with that. And then they'll go, okay, I'm maybe a bit more willing to take risks. I actually saw on the PR Insider website, there's a blog post from Marissa about how to persuade a client to take risks with their strategies, which is really important. You don't always think about that in the first instance, but your client is the one who's going to sign off the strategy. So you can have big ideas and you can have a big budget, but they might come to you and say, I've never tried that before, I don't want to do that. Or my competitor is doing campaigns, so I want to do campaigns. How much can you let the client dictate what the strategy is?
I mean, at the end of the day, we're the experts, not the client. I've had people come to me and say, well, they're doing that, why can't we do that? And it's definitely a learning curve. Yeah,
it's important to remember. You want to please the client, you want to hit their KPIs and work in line with their objectives, but ultimately you're being paid for a service that you are a professional at. You do it for a living. So there has to be it's a balancing act, right? You can't just say, this is what's going to work, let's do it. Because if they don't like that, you're kind of diminishing the trust from the get-go, even if it does end up working.
I always find that when I go on calls with SEOs, that like the tech SEOs, and they're the one that's there supporting you. And if the client comes back with a rogue question, they're there to jump in and that kind of thing. I always feel like clients are more willing to listen to you when there's somebody that's the one that's doing the tech part of the SEO is there to be like, yeah. Because I feel like at the moment, sometimes there is a bit of a barrier between tech, SEO and digital PR. So I feel like when there's that cohesion together, and when you're a team, when there's like a team on there that are supporting the idea and everything like that, I feel like that's when a client gets it into the head. Sometimes, obviously, being freelance, I work a lot by myself, and I find it hard to persuade clients when it's just me there, because how are they just going to take one singular person's word? But when I've worked with agencies where we've all been like this collective team and they've like pitched in things, then that's when I feel like clients like, oh.
Yeah. Because I guess even though tech, SEO in general, and digital PR are part of this, have the same goals, ultimately, like it's all about making your website more visible and rank better. Even though digital PR and PR in general is expanding, it's not always about that in terms of KPIs. So when you have somebody who's very techy and then somebody who's working maybe on the more creative side of things, and they're both agreeing about it and getting the value of it, I can see why a client would be on board with that. And it's just nice to have someone backing you up. Obviously, if you're on a call, you're going to say, no, this works and this is valuable. Yeah. So to have someone else saying, she's telling the truth, is just a bonus. Cool. To finish off then, let's just do a quick fire round of this or that. Don't worry. All you have to do is pick one of the two options that I give you. So this is digital PR, this or that.
Are you going to do like a whole theme tune?
We haven't got a theme tune for this or that, but if anyone at home listening is able to create a theme tune for digital PR, this or that, let us know. Okay. I would set a timer, but my phone is currently in use. So an arbitrary 30-second window. Let's go. Campaign or reactive PR?
Reactive.
Morning or afternoon outreach?
Morning.
Bulk send or send individually?
Send individually. I will die on that hill.
Moz or Ahrefs?
Ahrefs.
Follow-up or no follow-up?
Follow-up.
Response source or Rocks Hill?
Oh, Rocks Hill.
A hesitant Rocks Hill.
Rocks Hill, I think, is a great platform. Response source, I feel like, has different... I mean, I only use it for the journalist requests, so I feel like, yeah. Okay, yeah, Rocks Hill.
And finally, in an email, I hope you're well, or just cut to the chase.
Hope you're well.
Nice. That's like the ding at the end of the at the end of the session. Perfect. Right, I think that's it from me. Thank you very much for joining me. I think we've gone through loads of good stuff there. For those listening, you can find Thea on LinkedIn. I'll leave a link to that to the bottom. And as I said, I'll mention the newsletter in there as well. Big fans of that. And make sure that you subscribe or follow the podcast as well as Distinctly on LinkedIn. And stay tuned for the next episode.